Evening all. Quick audio check. Yeah, the events are ramping back up again, David. We've got this and in person coming up, and it's we've almost sold out the 100 seats already.
That's great.
Tis the season.
Well, I think everybody went through a little bit of COVID Zoom fatigue, and it's good to see people getting over that.
Indeed. Indeed. Okay. As everyone jumps on in, welcome. Welcome, everybody. For those of you that are first-time attendees to our course, welcome. This is probably one of our most requested annual courses because it brings up the good old question, David, as we were just discussing, the healers versus stealers across the board. So allow me the quick introduction of our guest speaker this evening, David Harris. David Harris is the man who needs no introduction, is the author, international speaker, CEO of his company, Prosperident. For over the decades, David has made it his mission to catch and send dental embezzlers to jail and to share his vast knowledge so that dentists can protect their practices. His newest book, Healers versus Stealers, How to Outsmart the Thief in Your Dental Practice, was released in August of 2023. David is a forensic CPA, certified fraud examiner, and a licensed private investigator. So it is a true privilege, David, to have you join us this evening, and welcome to our serious webinar series.
Oh, always great to be with you, Eric. I love the time we spend together, and we both get to talk about something important, which is dentist wallets.
Indeed, indeed. And we had some great components. It's amazing how a lot of the content, the information, and the case studies have changed so much since the past 3 or 4 years that we've done this. So great to see. Our chats are open, so let us know whereabouts in the world you're coming from this evening. I know we've got a bunch throughout the US, a bunch coast to coast throughout Canada, coast to coast to coast to coast. And we've got a few hundred here for this evening. Also, the Q&A is open. So we will give some great components at the end to cover some of the Q&A, but feel free to post those as we go. Rhode Island, Pennsylvania, Alaska, we've actually got an active lease negotiation going on right there right now. So let's jump in. We've got a ton of great things to cover, and we certainly look forward to sharing some great best practices. As a reminder, you're not alone in all of this. There are some great resources out there. The purpose of tonight, again, is just to have some good, open, candid conversations about when things do go wrong. And part of that is not to be alarmist or otherwise, but to give you some great key, tangible tips, tricks, and support, and to realize what resources are out there to help ensure that you feel that you're on a level playing field, not feeling like you're in a teeter-totter, right, with a landlord or a thief in your midst, right, which is far more attentive to the challenges at hand. So on that note, let's jump in. So the purpose of tonight is a whole bunch of brand new content. So for those of you that have joined one of our previous ones, we've got all sorts of new and updated components here. So what we want to do is to give some good recent examples and hearing it right from the doctor's mouths, both from the lease negotiation side, as well as the acts of embezzlement and the impact of the office lease. What's happened with interest rates has been astounding. And unfortunately, many landlords are getting squeezed with the much higher interest rates. And unfortunately, when they look across, and when you look out of your own practice and look to the left and look to the right, who do you think they're going to squeeze? Is it the florist, right, or the nail salon, or the multi-million-dollar dental practice in between? Bellevue, Washington, welcome. So on that note, we're going to give some good practical tips and tricks on how to protect yourself from embezzlement, right, as well as to how to be empowered and to completely rethink and knock the landlord off their usual course of business, which can really help to completely turn around that typical, very frustrating or lease renewal that unfortunately many doctors today are signing in between patients without properly understanding what the landlord is now sneaking in. On that note, some updated stats, pretty staggering, but we still see today, and quite frankly, even more so, some landlords are adding language right into the lease, clearly stating that the doctor cannot sell their clinic or therefore assign the lease right in the standard form lease. Also, 54% of dentists, and especially in the coastal areas, many of which are overpaying in rent versus what they have today. And yes, as I was referring to before, some large national landlords are now including language that states that they will have full access to your sale, right? Agreement of purchase and sale, right? Term sheets, as well as your full financial information in preparation for their approval of the sale of your clinic and therefore the assignment of the lease. And some now are actually saying, in conjunction with the sale of your clinic, any money that you are receiving for any of the leaseholds, the walls, the flooring, the electrical, the plumbing, etc., right, that the landlord is entitled to that money. So it is truly astounding as landlords are feeling the squeeze and are realizing that these dental tenants are being able to sell their clinics for huge profitability, right? Which the landlord can say, well, how much is your clinic worth without my keys? I'm going to start now that we've had a few latecomers arrive. Quick little intro poll. So David and I always love to keep things fresh and aligned with the attendees. So give us a little bit of background. Do you own or do you lease your space, right? What best describes your current situation in your career? In terms of timelines for eventual expiries for your leases, right? As well as a quick points to be reconnecting with either David or ourselves if you have some very time-sensitive questions. A little bit about us, very, very high level, is we're unique. We're the only healthcare specialized tenant advisory and lease negotiation firm of our kind and size in North America. This is it. This is all we do. So 30 years, David. You started speaking with us probably at least a decade ago. And here we are 3 years later, truly humbled as our mission is to always protect those, right, who keep us healthy and protect us. And our goals are to always keep doctors being doctors and, allow the specialists to help deal with the challenging landlords, brokers, etc. So from that perspective, as a true resource, we continue to support 13,000 of our successful office lease negotiations through the process. And pleasure to speak with David across many of the big shows across the continent. Why do we exist? This is another great simplified slide that David always gives us some great best practices on. So this is a great perspective. Fundamentally, in my opinion, that the whole lease negotiation model is flawed. You've got those that are being paid by the landlord, and the more the doctor pays, the higher the increased cost of or the higher of commission payout that goes through to the broker. Then once it's locked in with a binding letter of intent, it goes over to lawyer or otherwise, which at that point, from the landlord's eyes, a lot of the negotiation is done. So what we found is, right, this really unique sweet spot. And for the 13,000 of these, we are the organization that helps to make sure that you've got a clear understanding with how valuable you are as a tenant, right? With being paid for only by the doctor as their advisor to help throughout all of North America, and with over 20,000 dental specific office leases on. With that being said, an empowerment side is you are the best tenant on the planet. You've got the highest build-out costs, you've got the lowest default rates, and unfortunately, you also are in the situation where you're in the same location for 26 and a half years, yet also the least likely to get all the value for you being such a great tenant. The other key piece to be aware of is the importance of the dreaded demolitions and relocation provisions. And most don't even list as demolition. They just say the landlord can substantially renovate the building, which can have the exact same impact. And as you'll see, can impact hundreds of thousands of dollars from your practice sale. There are hundreds of thousands of dollars of traps, right? also the lease becomes the most expensive check that you will send to any entity in your personal or professional career. Also, for the many of you, so roughly 42% are looking to transition, David, in the next 5 years. Another 9% are planning to stay put and renew, right? Plus another 20% looking to buy, expand, or relocate in the near future. So renovations or expansions are a perfect time to leverage your leverage, negotiate a new lease, and protect yourself. For those of you that own your own building, right, the lease becomes just as important. Let's get into some of the case studies. So this is a recent webinar that I did with one of the large national brokerages that showed this example. And because of how devastating the lease, the office lease, has become on the impact of the banks in order to give a loan to the buyer, this is how they have now impacted their valuations. So, quick view, you've got a $1.05 million producing practice with a little over $300,000 of profit, EBITDA, right? With a current 6.2 multiple, with a clean lease, with a 10-year term, 2 5-year options, without any demolitions and relocations provisions, the practice would be worth $1.9 million in terms of what it would be listed for by the broker. Switching over 2 points, because unfortunately this doctor had signed a 15-year term with that broker. Now the doctor unfortunately is stuck with a demolition clause, which gives the landlord roughly 6 months worth of notice, and the doctor's out at any time. So because of that, what many brokerages are doing is they are now, in essence, taking a reduction, building in that risk to the buyer, which is the risk that the bank is taking on to give that buyer a multi-million-dollar loan. They have now reduced the price of the practice by $350 per square foot, or in this recent example, $525,000. One clause hidden that didn't even say demolition. The brokerages now are reducing the practice listing price, not the eventual sale price, just the listing price, in this case by over $525,000. So even if, right, and where big value comes is even just pushing out the demolition clause, getting a 5-year deferral of the demolition clause. That's a $1.6 million value, or almost an extra $300,000, because it takes away so much risk from the buyer's perspective. So ultimately, the reason why we're here screaming from the rooftops is because this doctor had no idea it was even in there until after the broker had gone through it and said, this is a problem, right? Please reach out to Cirrus to get this rectified. But unfortunately, being locked in with another 11 years to go, right, made it very difficult. So bottom line is so important nationally to understand what the impact is within your lease, and seeing some updated examples as to why and how the valuations are being changed as much as they are. For those of you that attended some of our recent Henry Schein webinars, this is one I did with Dr. Tom Schneider, who's one of the keynote speakers for the Henry Schein's dental practice transitions team. This was an example in the Northeast recently where the doctor had a in their lease agreement on the transfer, they wanted to have at least 50% of the net assets of the seller. Well, David, you and I both know the assets of a buyer versus the assets of a seller, right, is back to that pendulum and teeter-totter we touched on before. So this was a prime example where the landlord used one little clause in there that stated that, hey, unfortunately, the seller is down, the buyer is down here for financial strength versus the seller. And now they made the seller to be required to be liable for an additional 5 years, even after the practice was sold. So because of this process, right? 5 full-priced offers were rejected by both the seller and therefore the correspondingly the landlord, right? All because of the fact that there was this gross disparagement where the seller did not want to be continually liable, right? And there wasn't any buyer coming in that was at least of 50% of the net assets of the seller. Another recent example across the US was a month-to-month lease term. For those of you that represent roughly 9.2% of the attendees tonight, a month-to-month lease, you might think, David, it's fantastic. I'm thinking of retiring in the next 3 or 5 years. I just want to run down my lease and not have any further liability. That thinking is wrong. If you are $1 million producing practice, rough numbers, right, and you are looking to sell your clinic, right, and you're not just selling your charts or closing up shop and walking away, but the sale is going to represent a significant amount to your retirement. What is critical to know now, especially throughout the US and Canada, is that the banks will not issue a long-term loan to the buyer if there's insufficient term on the lease. Even worse, I was at the Thrive Live course, which is coming up again in Las Vegas in May. We had over 80 doctors in the room. And what was interesting was there was a perfect example where the doctor was in San Francisco who said, look, I just recently tried to buy a second practice for my wife. I went to the landlord to say I was looking to take over the lease. And the landlord said, why are you buying the clinic? I'm the landlord. It's my space. The lease is almost up for renewal, right? There's no further term. Tell you what, just do a deal with me. How much less can you spend to buy the clinic, right? If you just engage with a new lease with me, the landlord. So right in the center of the Bellagio Hotel was just a perfect example as to why a month-to-month lease could cause hundreds of thousands of dollars of impact to your practice sale. Again, if you're looking to sell, think of it from the eventual long-term practice sale proceeds and the predictability and continuity of revenue, which obviously comes from that rock-solid lease. Lastly, right, looking at it through the eyes of the purchaser. This was just a typical situation where the purchaser was having to go through 101 hoops with the landlord, right? And unfortunately, after spending many, many times, even after all the hard work was done, right? The purchaser got so frustrated with all the hoops the landlord had and within the original lease, killed the deal, and it cost the buyer and seller almost $30,000 worth of legal fees for nothing. Here's a recent example of a doctor that I was recently with the Pacific Dental Conference.
You don't know what you don't know until you realize it, and having someone who's done this before, and it's very valuable because they know exactly what to look for, and they know exactly what they need to do to get the right outcome. You don't know what you don't know until.
So from that perspective, prime example of a doctor that was in the situation, needed to relocate, and was shocked at what was hidden within the lease, right, to move across the street. Through that, personal guarantees, right, is a big one that should definitely be limited or removed if you're coming up to your next renewal. Be aware of things like death and disability clauses. These are just some of the many components where recently a devastating example of a doctor who was in his early 40s, who had built out a beautiful 6-operatory practice. 3 weeks prior to the grand opening, the doctor had passed away due to a massive heart attack. Fully built out clinic, no doctor, no patients. I ask each of you, how much is that clinic worth? Unfortunately, in that case, 0, right? The bank got the pound of flesh from the life insurance policy. Unfortunately, they went back to the spouse and said, unfortunately, Mrs. Smith, you're now responsible for roughly $9,000 a month, increasing at 4% per year for the remaining 9.5 years on the lease. So things like death and disability clauses, things like a delay in the demolition clauses, and or removing of the likelihood or the landlord's ability to take over a percentage of the practice sale proceeds becomes absolutely critical. So as we look forward, the assignment clause, for those of you following along, the assignment clause is one of the biggest ticking time bombs within your lease, right? That can, in essence, prevent the landlord from allowing you to sell your clinic. In almost every single lease we've reviewed over the past 30 years, the landlord must approve and consent, right, of the assignment of that lease, which is one of the 2 conditions of sale. A personal client of mine, the most lovely dentist I would believe on the planet, was ready for retirement, had a long career with all sorts of challenges. She finally, in her 70s, had planned to exit, and she tried to sell her clinic 3 separate times. Each time the landlord said no. Therefore, at now 74 years of age, she was forced to relocate her clinic 10 minutes north. Luckily, we were able to secure and get the landlord to cover almost all of the build-out costs. But can you imagine, at the end of 40 years of painstaking lower back pains, continental delivery at 12 o'clock, right, to be forced just to be able to extract that money as part of your practice sale, being forced all because of that exact same clause in the lease. From that perspective, these are just some, but this could be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars of risk. Options to renew. One last component here is don't miss your option to renew. If you miss your option to renew, then this is what can occur, and any additional 5-year options become null and void, and you lose your right to stay in the space. Here's a recent example of exactly what happened in that situation, and you can hear it in the doctor's own words.
My name is Sam Thatcher. I'm a general dentist here in San Francisco, and I'm also the team dentist for the San Francisco Giants. I've been practicing about 20 years. I've been in this space for 16 years. We actually started from scratch. This was an empty space when we started. And we had a family friend who's an attorney look over the lease for us. Although we really didn't negotiate that much because we were just really excited to get in and start practicing. After practicing for 15 years, my lease was coming up for renewal, and I actually missed the renewal deadline. So that made me pretty nervous and anxious about renegotiating a new lease with fair and affordable terms to protect me and my family. My Henry Schein sales rep, Ellen Hong, is the one who recommended Cirrus Consulting Group to us. She's been our sales rep for years, and I really trust everything she recommends to us. So when Cirrus looked over my lease, they found several major issues. The assignment clause gave my landlord the right to terminate my lease and throw me out of the practice if I tried to assign the practice to someone else. There's a clause in the lease that says that the owners are entitled to half of the funds from a sale. In other words, if I were to sell my practice for $1 million, they would receive $500,000 of that. And the new owner, if they were to default, I would be on the hook financially. There was the relocation clause, which said that they could actually relocate this practice to somewhere else in the building at any time, and I would be left on the hook financially for that move. After reviewing the lease, it was a no-brainer to retain Cirrus to handle my lease negotiations. Cirrus was able to negotiate some very reasonable rental rates. They were also able to eliminate the relocation clause completely. They were also able to renegotiate the assignment clause. This took away my landlord's rights to any of the practice sale proceeds. It also took away their right to terminate the lease, and it took me off the hook financially if the new owner were to default. Cirrus was also able to negotiate $6,000 in a tenant improvement allowance to allow me to remodel my space. They also negotiated a 5-year option to renew, and they gave me the ability to review any operating costs charged to me by the landlord to make sure I'm being charged fairly for any CAM fees or other operating expenses.
Ultimately, a core component to help make sure that don't fall into the same traps as Dr. Thatcher. Really don't fall into the trap by starting early. What we're seeing as an epidemic these days, our landlords are never reminding doctors of the fact that they must give written notice 6 or even 12 months prior to the lease expiry date in order to exercise that next 5-year option. So the calls we're getting every single day is usually from a doctor that has missed that option to renew deadline, is now getting a brand new lease proposed to them, or a significant rent increase, or inserting demolitions, et cetera, and has now taken what was a good or average lease and has now taken it 4 steps back because you're now pot committed, and the landlord has done nothing but simply run out the clock and found a way to increase their profits without a penny of additional expense. So as I pass it to David in a moment, the strategies that I ask each of you to take away with tonight. Number 1, get all of that documentation and information. If you do not have the original lease from 1986 that was signed from your seller's seller, right, that was signed by both parties, then it's not worth the paper it's written on. You want to know exactly what that original lease is binding you to, as well as every amendment, rider, exhibit, estoppel, review, etc. Get all of that information. Number 2, figure out your long-term goals. Right? No different as David works with his clients of thinking about when do you want to transition. Right? Tell us about your long-term plans. Tell us about the type of dentistry you're doing today, and make sure that you've got a long-term plan, right, aligned to the long-term goals of the lease. Number 3 is, if any of these seem to be a surprise, or you have not had a second opinion or someone else looking at that lease, Dr. Thatcher, a family friend, was a lawyer, right? So excited, just signed on without any clue that some of these ticking time bombs were in this lease. Make sure you've got the data, rental rates, vacancies, comp reports, right? You are the best tenant on the planet, right? Make sure that you're leveraging your leverage. And last but not least, create what we like to call internally is the negotiation treatment plan, right? Which is to know exactly what the must-haves are, what the nice-to-haves are, and what you're willing to concede in order to help accomplish what the must-haves are, that give and take throughout the process. What have we not done at this point, David, is to pick up the phone and call the landlord. So I implore you, please do not pick up the phone and call the landlord as you run into the office tomorrow. Much better to get a clear understanding of what is within the lease, right? And then to determine how to help handle and what's realistic to get removed, completely rewritten, or protected throughout the course. Then negotiating the financials, then the business clauses, right? And then don't stop until you get a final form lease signed by all. And ideally in your corporation, not with any personal guarantees. On that note, this is one component in appreciation of everyone's time. We have had over 500 of these recently, of doctors that are now realizing, in some cases too late, of what is hidden within the lease. If you have not had a lease reviewed before, there's a quick little button on screen. We're happy to do a full rental rate, looking at all of your local demographics, and also, more importantly, helping to identify what some of those $100,000 traps and or, right, personal liabilities are within your lease today. On that note, again, as the owner of Cirrus Consulting Group, our goal every day is to help let you know that A, you are not alone in all of this. You are the best tenant on your planet. And more importantly, especially if your lease is coming up in the next 2 years, right, as you'll see from David, the behavior of your landlord, the behavior of your broker, the behavior of the people involved will be very telling throughout the process. So looking at those cues, if this is telling, no different than as you're assessing your staff, right? It's telling that if your landlord is not being proactive with you about your upcoming lease review or lease renewal, if your landlord is not sending you notice prior to your option to renew deadline, if the landlord or anyone on your team says, oh, it's a standard form, just sign it, doc, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine, right? Sign here, push hard to your binding letter of intent or offer, right? That is one of the other tells that maybe there's something more to it. And it makes sense to have someone else give an additional analysis of that lease. From that perspective, yes, those of you that are in that situation, we're happy to assist as we go through. You're not alone. It is so important that you've got a good, clear understanding, and then more importantly, leveraging the incredible team that can help support you from start to finish, protect your profits, and also protect you from stealers so you can remain a healer. On that note, I will pass it on perfect timing to the one and only David Harris.
Clever play on words there for sure. Well done. From my perspective, what I like about Cirrus is this. The battle, and let's call it a battle between landlord and tenant, is very much tipped in the landlord's favor. The landlord does this for a living. They have lots of resources. They have lawyers. And then on the other side, you have this dentist who has probably access to very few of the same resources. And what Cirrus does that is why I like you guys, Eric, is you level the playing field. You give the tenant the same kind of power that the landlord has. And that has to be a good idea. So now we're going to change gears. And, you know, as I was listening to you, Eric, I was starting to appreciate what kind of thieves landlords could be. I'm now, of course, going to talk about a different kind of thief, and that's the thief in a practice. And what I'm going to do with you tonight is I'm going to let you vicariously live through a little bit of an embezzlement. And you see how it ends up. The office manager stole $370,000. So we're going to hear from a victim. She's a dentist in Las Vegas. And she was on the wrong side of this one. And her name is Deborah Staten. Deborah was kind enough to record some video with us where she talked about her experience going through this embezzlement and the investigation that followed. You're also going to hear from one of our investigators. His name is Scott Clifford. Scott lives in California, and he's certainly one of our most skilled investigators. And he was the guy on the case, and he's going to give his observations as well. But we're going to start with a piece from the local news in Las Vegas, and let's hear what happened. Oops.
Our 8 News Now I-Team with a story you will only see right here on 8 News Now. An office manager accused of embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars from not one, not two, but 3 different dentists.
And now one of those dentists telling our David Sharns exactly what happened. And David, apparently the suspect also pleading to get out of jail as well.
Yeah, she was. And the I-Team, the only ones in court for her hearing today, as Danielle Powers asked that judge to release her from jail pending trial. The trial for her first set of charges.
We have spots to fill, and it's so easy to just interview someone and then put them in the position of trust.
Dr. Deborah Staten put her trust in her office manager, Danielle Powers.
Our goal here at Desert Hills Dental is always make your dentistry affordable.
That's Powers in a video highlighting the office, Desert Hills Dental, on Facebook. Here's another photo as the practice celebrates Powers' birthday. She was the most fabulous office manager ever. Was because she's now charged with embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars from the business.
Although I had too much trust within one person who almost nearly sunk my ship.
Evidence in the criminal case includes this video, which prosecutors say shows Powers coming back into work and taking cash.
You see how it ends. She came back at night and took cash. You saw the total already. It was $370,000. So as I say, Deborah Staten was kind enough to come on camera and tell some of her story. There she is. Terrific lady. She's a major in the U.S. Army Reserve. Just a great person. And the thief in this case, Danielle Powers, just took full advantage of the trust that Deborah had in her. So let's hear first from Deborah as she talks about why she called us.
Well, we were a little suspicious that something was happening for at least a year prior to that. Although my husband and I felt rather green at what we were doing, and we were happy with the success that was happening. Although what we kept saying to each other was, well, if she's stealing, it can't be much because we're doing okay. And I think that was more out of scarcity, because we didn't know, we weren't convinced we could do it ourselves without her. And so we just felt like we couldn't do better without her. So we're just going to tolerate this.
And a couple of things come across there. The first is that, like a lot of dentists, Deborah kind of put the symptoms that she was seeing on ignore. She talked herself out of the fact that she might have a problem. And she said it was about a year between when she first started seeing symptoms and when she called us at Prosperident. The second thing that she verbalized there was the feeling that she would be sunk without the office manager. In other words, whatever value Danielle Powers had to the practice exceeded what she might be stealing. Now, I think Deborah feels differently about that now, but at the time, Eric, that's how she felt. This is Scott Clifford, who is one of our most senior investigators, and let's hear his take on the case.
I've been doing this for a while, so I know some things to look at, some of the high points first. And within the first few reports that I pulled, I really got the sense that there was something egregiously wrong with the data and what I was seeing. There were some pretty clear markers in there for me, from my eye, not to everybody's, but to my eye. When I started looking at that case, I was like, yeah, this is going to be significant.
So Scott had one of those unpleasant conversations with Deborah where he said to her, Danielle's got her hand in your pocket and it's in there pretty deeply. How did Deborah feel when she heard this news? Let's let her tell the story.
When Scott first told us that embezzlement was in fact happening, we weren't surprised at the fact that it was happening, because we knew that, and that's why we were having conversations with Scott. But what we were shocked by was the amount of embezzlement that was happening, and the way that it was happening. And so hurt, I was incredibly hurt because of the relationship that we had built with her over the years, because she was more than just an office employee to me. And so to know that the amount of embezzlement that had been going on, and for the time period that it was going on, was just, that's what crushed me. It wasn't so much shock, it was just the fact that the betrayal that had happened.
If I'm an embezzler, the thing I want the most for you to think is that I would be so screwed if David ever left. And what that means is that I worm my way into your family. I'm the person who runs your personal errands on my lunch hour. I babysit your kids when you go for a night out with your husband. I work my way into your life. And that's exactly what Danielle Powers had done to Deborah. Deborah would describe Danielle, I think at the time, as a friend. A personal friend, with a relationship that went beyond the work relationship. And that's very common. Let's let Scott tell a little more of the story.
Well, the interesting part about that particular case is, yes, you are in Las Vegas, and yes, you do take in a lot of cash by virtue of the demographic. And it's not all just gambling. It's, you know, very tip oriented, service oriented business culture there. But even though she was stealing virtually all of the cash, that wasn't enough for her. So we found evidence that she was actually eliciting the patient base to bring in more cash and then giving them discounts if they did. So not only, she couldn't just steal the already plentiful cash, she had to steal more. But in order to do that, she had to convince people to bring it in. In order to do that, she traded away even more of Dr. Staten's money.
Now, there's one thing I want to pick up because it's easy to get the wrong impression here. Cash is the first choice of every thief, but it's not their only choice. In this case, Danielle Powers was predominantly a cash thief. However, in a lot of practices, we will see people stealing checks. It's not that hard to intercept credit card payments. We are increasingly seeing electronic funds transfers being intercepted by thieves. And the one that I want every dentist in the audience to hear loudly is one of the most dangerous ways for you to get paid is something called a VCC or virtual credit card. So that's where insurance companies pay you by giving you a prepaid credit card number, like a 16-digit credit card number that has money attached. If you are getting paid by VCCs, it's bad on a whole lot of levels, and stealing is part of it. The other part is that the way that you get paid when an insurance company pays you by VCC is you enter that number into your merchant terminal, which means that your credit card processing company is going to take a fee as well. So there are a lot of things wrong with VCCs. And if you are getting paid that way, to quote a former first lady, just say no. Go back to the insurance companies that are paying you and tell them that you no longer wish to be paid by virtual credit card. The insurance companies like this for a couple of reasons. One is it's much cheaper for them to process than to send you a physical check or do an electronic funds transfer. The second thing, as a friend of mine pointed out, is there probably are kickback arrangements between the companies that process credit cards and the insurance companies, where the insurance companies are getting a slice of that pie as well. But just say no, and if they don't listen to you when you request it, get your lawyer to request that they not pay you by virtual credit cards. A lot of states have enacted or are in the process of enacting laws that say that there must be at least one way that you can get paid by an insurance company that doesn't cost you money. So if you are being paid by VCC virtual credit card, let's get that stopped now. So Scott completed his investigation. He did a report. The next stop was law enforcement. So this was the Clark County District Attorney's Office in Nevada. I'll let Danielle tell you what happened next. Sorry, not Danielle. Danielle's the thief. I will let Deborah tell you what happened next.
The Prosper Dent report itself was the key component to her actually paying the price in not only my case, but in the second case that was filed against her, that Prosper Dent also did a report on. Without the report, nothing would have happened because of the overwhelming evidence that Scott was able to create and produce. And it was beyond a reasonable doubt just within the report. It was just a matter of the DA taking all of that knowledge and caring enough to present it in a way that was enlightening to the jurors or the judge. It was Scott was phenomenal in laying out and really highlighting, like, even statistics. He showed statistics of the amount of cash that was going through my office versus what should be going through a normal dental office.
Sometimes people hear that it's hard to prosecute an embezzlement case in a dental practice. If it's done right, it's not hard at all. The challenging part is to explain what happened in a way that a district attorney or a judge who really doesn't understand a whole lot about dentistry can grasp what happened and what happened that was wrong. And if I'm going to pat my team on the back, I will pat them on the back for taking dental concepts and explaining them in lay people's terms. And that's exactly what happened here. The comment of the district attorney was, I wish every forensic report we got was done to the standard that yours was, because our job would be easier. So Danielle Powers was sentenced to 8 years in prison for this theft. And the other thing that Deborah told you is that she became one of those serial embezzlers. So these are people who steal from multiple practices. And she stole from 2 other practices after she got fired by Deborah. We did the investigation on one of those and found further theft. So Danielle's life is about to get even a little bit worse. I asked Deborah, what did you learn from this? And I think she has great advice for any dental practitioner.
So some advice for a new dentist starting out would be to learn how to do everything from the beginning while the business is beginning, or don't even become a practice owner until you know how the front office works. It's so very important to be able to analyze your numbers, to know why the adjustments are being made, to know why, to know what your collection rate is off of your treatment, and to understand where to keep the checks and balances so that you are earning what you're worth. The thing that I learned the most from this experience was to know that there's way more to being a great dentist than just drilling, filling, and billing. It's very important to continue to have a great culture within your office and trust people. One thing I guess I can say I learned to do was to not hold someone's mistakes against everybody else going forward. I still trust and I still allow and delegate, and I do not micromanage because nobody wants to work for someone that does that. But I learned how to analyze and look at things from behind at the 1,000-foot view, and to be able to see if anything isn't working properly.
Good advice, and I'm going to give you some specifics in a minute. This picture, which I absolutely love, is when we had the handcuffs put on Danielle Powers. And the best part of this picture, Eric, is that she is right outside her lawyer's office when we had her arrested. So it just doesn't get any better than that. Deborah Staten got money back both from her insurance policy, and something that dentists don't always necessarily realize is that you all have insurance coverage against employee theft. It may not be a lot, but you all have something. She also got what's called restitution. In other words, Danielle Powers was ordered to pay her back. Some of Danielle's assets were seized. And when she gets out of prison, her future earnings are going to be garnished to go towards what she owes Deborah Staten. So not 100% recovery yet, but some money back and more to follow. Here are some things that you can do in your practice to protect yourself. And I'm going to just reduce these down to very basics. The first thing is this: if you do not compare collections according to your practice management software with deposits at your bank, the position you put yourself in is that the dumbest, laziest thief on the planet can steal from you. The conventional wisdom was this should happen at the end of every day. It's a lot less time consuming and also more effective if you look at this on a monthly basis rather than dealing with individual days. The problem with trying to compare collections against deposits daily is that there are a lot of items that have a time offset. For example, if a patient pays you by credit card today, your practice management software will treat that as a collection today, but the money won't hit your bank for a couple of days. If you're trying to do this comparison daily, that stuff will drive you crazy. On the other hand, if you do it once a month, now the only transactions with a time offset are ones that overhang either the first day of the month or the last day of the month, which is a lot smaller problem to have. In other words, most of those timing differences will self-correct. when you do this monthly as opposed to daily. And I'll just remind the audience, the Q&A box is there. If you have a question, don't feel like you have to wait till the end. Just put it in now, and Eric and I will get to it when we get a chance. The second thing I'm going to talk about is articulation. And as soon as I talk about articulation to a dental audience, what goes through all of your minds is that friendship that the mandible and the maxilla have. And that's articulation in your world. In my world, it's a little bit different. Well, let's say that last month your practice was open 20 days. And in your left hand, you have 20 day-end reports from your practice management software. And in your right hand, you have 1 month-end summary from the software. What should happen is that the totals of 3 important numbers, which are fees, adjustments, and payments for those 20 day-end reports, if you add all those up, should be exactly the same as the month-end report. If they're not, ladies and gentlemen, what that means is that somebody came in after hours and they did things that you didn't want to see. So articulation is the process of adding up the day-end totals to make sure that they line up with the month-end total. And that's how you make sure that you have seen everything that happened in your practice. It's a very simple calculation. It also doesn't have to be done by you personally. It can't be your office manager or your receptionist, but you could outsource this. I mean, your bookkeeper could do it, your spouse could do it, your kid in college could do it. It doesn't have to be you, but it really needs to be done. And the third thing I want to talk about is how duties are divided up in your office. And you've probably heard the term revenue cycle, which refers to the sequence of activities that happen that result in money going into your bank account. And there are basically 5 tasks in the revenue cycle. And here they are. Somebody enters treatment into software. That's kind of the start of the revenue cycle. Somebody receives payment, so either over the counter or through the mail or electronically. Somebody does what's called posting. In other words, records that payment in your practice management software. Then at the end of each day, your staff should be balancing, and then somebody puts money in the bank. So those are the 5 things that happen. Treatment is entered, receive, record, balance, deposit. And I'm going to give you 3 rules for how duties get divided up. The first one is, whoops, sorry, I thought I had another slide with the rules. 3 rules. Treatment should only ever be entered by clinicians in the clinical area. So if we're talking about your operatory doctor, it's either you or your assistant who enter treatment. 2 more rules. Of the 4 remaining things, which are receive, record, balance, deposit, nobody should ever do more than 2 of those. And the 2 that somebody does should not be consecutive. In other words, whoever gets the mail should not be the person who records those checks in practice management software. The person recording payment should not be the person who balances at the end of the day, and so on. So nobody does more than 2, and the 2 are not consecutive. If you're in a big practice with 5 front desk staff, dividing stuff up among those 5 is easy. On the other hand, if you have a 1 dentist, 1 hygienist, 1 front desk person kind of practice, achieving a proper division of duties gets a little bit more challenging. And normally the answer is that you personally probably have to do 1 or 2 of these tasks to make it work. So these are 3 easy, simple things that you can do in your practice to protect yourself. If you don't, we're here to help you, but just like dentistry, prevention is a whole lot cheaper and less invasive than the cure. Prosperident is a company that's been in business for 34 years, and we basically do 2 things. If you have concerns about theft in your practice, or you've already found it, or you want to protect yourself, we do stealthy investigations. In other words, we can look at your practice and see if somebody's stealing without your staff having any idea that that's happening. The other thing we do is our proactive work, which is called owner proactive strategies. And that's when we work with a practice owner to put the guardrails in place that will protect them from being victims in the future. And this includes everything from helping you do a proper pre-employment screening process before you hire people, to the safeguards you have over cash in your practice, to how you as a practice owner exercise oversight. And owner proactive strategies, or OPS, the short form of it, is our fastest growing product. And we love to talk to you about how to keep yourself safe going forward. Eric, that's my story. And we'd love to take your questions.
There's been a couple either privately done through the chat. You can also do it anonymously to the Q&A. Looks like, David, you had a quick note from a past client of yours. It's alluding to even worse than the employee is the business partner. Can you speak to that for the doctors that are contemplating buying into a clinic, or potentially having an associate buy in, or someone that's a long-standing 50-50 partner that might be going through a divorce or might be going through a challenging time, etc.? How do you know your partner, by definition, should be the one that you trust and you're, sitting back to back in the foxhole with when all the bullets are flying over you? Can you talk a little bit about the fraud and otherwise that can occur with a partner?
Yeah, that's an interesting topic, Eric, and one that doesn't, in my opinion, get enough airplay. So just to give people numbers, my company has a total of 20, we're up to 25 people now, 18 of whom are investigators. And what they do all day, every day, because the only market we serve is dentistry. So we don't help medical doctors or chiropractors or anybody else. It's dentistry only. And we keep 25 people busy with this exact problem. So we have approximately between 100 and 115 open cases at any point in time, Eric. So that's what we're working on today. And usually about 8 to 10 of those are what we call fratricide. Fratricide being from the Latin to steal from one's brother, or to kill one's brother. And those are the situations you described. It's a group practice, and one of the doctors is taking money from the others. A case we worked on recently involved 2 oral surgeons, and they practiced together, and they had 3 locations together. And one of the guys decided he was going to open his own location somewhere else. And then the next thing he did was he ran all of the costs of opening that new location, buying equipment, printing brochures, everything you could imagine. He ran that all through the partnership. So, he got his partner unknowingly to pay 50% of the cost of this guy's opening a new office that 100% of the profitability belonged to him. And his partner eventually realized what was going on and got us involved. It was hundreds of thousands of dollars involved. I think the total was around $300,000. And the oral surgeon who did that is now looking at prison, and of course he will never hold a handpiece or a scalpel again. He lost it all over getting greedy. And it's a horrible thing, but unfortunately it happens, and it happens a lot more than people realize. As I say, somewhere around 8% of our cases involve that. And when you think that it's a minority of dentists who practice in a group practice in the first place, that's a shockingly high number. In terms of what to do about it, I guess the first thing is be aware. If you are in a group practice, and we know this, Eric, when you have multiple dentists in group practices, the jobs that have to be done get divided up, and in a lot of cases what we run into is what I call Dr. Clinical and Dr. Business. So Dr. Clinical is the dentist who will be the one who decides which cone beam to buy, who might hire the clinical staff. Dr. Business kind of oversees the front desk, and it's unfortunately really easy in that scenario for Dr. Business to take advantage of the situation. not every dentist with the ability to take advantage of the situation will do it, of course. But that percentage who will can cause their partners a lot of grief.
A few follow-ups there. So that's Dr. B said that was exactly what happened to him, which is devastating. I've been business partners myself. It's, you know, you're fighting the slings and the arrows every day. It's the one resource that should always be in your same corner as you're fighting to help keep as many dollars from going out and staying in throughout the course of the day. Another question about how to get some of the information, the best practices, the rental rates, demographics. I'll pull that up one extra time here. So there's been a few follow-ups in the chat for that one, and the chat you can do to the host directly, which some of you are doing, or to the Q&A. A question that came through just a moment ago, David, if an employee has embezzled, are you still required to give their safe harbor contribution?
Yeah, I think I'll maybe give a slightly broader answer. Let's say that an employee has stolen $50,000 from you and you're about to fire them and you haven't signed their final paycheck yet. In every state in the US and every province in Canada, employee pay is sacred. So you cannot, in general, offset their pay against some amount they might owe you because, for example, they stole from you. And it's galling to have to give them that final paycheck as you're firing them because they stole from you. The same logic applies to things like a 401, an employer-funded 401k. You can't go back in and take those contributions. There's a law called ERISA, which is the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, that says basically that pension type amounts cannot be seized to satisfy a debt to the employer. Again, it's galling to see an employee who has a whole lot of money in a 401k that you can't touch, even though they stole, even though arguably it was funded with money they stole from you. But that's the way the law works. There is an exception when somebody's prosecuted and they have what's called a restitution order. And that's what we got in that Danielle Powers case. That will pierce ERISA. In other words, when a judge orders in a criminal trial, when a judge orders somebody to pay the victim back, that trumps everything. And retirement savings, which would otherwise be covered under a safe harbor, are no longer safe, but that's the only way to get it. I hope that answered the question, but if it didn't, feel free to pop up another one in the chat for us.
David, some other sort of practical things day one. Let it be monitoring the alarm, installing cameras. What are some other, making sure that the credit card statement goes to the home address versus to the office, all things that I've done in my business. David, what are some other good tactical tips and tricks that I learn every time?
A lot of good wisdom you just discharged. First of all, one of the most time efficient things you can do to monitor your employees is to get your alarm company to send you what they will normally call the access log or the entry log. So every time anybody arms or disarms the alarm in your practice, that's logged by your alarm company, and they're happy to send you once a month a PDF of that log. One of the things that we know about thieves, Eric, is that they like to be alone when they steal. In other words, most stealing happens when the office is closed. And monitoring people's comings and goings and seeing if they show up at weird times is a great way to monitor that. And it really takes about 5 minutes a month to review that log, because it's not like your practice opens 100 times a month. So you can see if people are going in at weird times. And needless to say, a corollary to this is that everybody needs their own code to your alarm. The concept of the Unicode, where there's one alarm code and everybody has it, is a really bad idea. Just like the universal login to your practice management software where everybody logs in under the same login ID, equally bad. So you need to set up each employee with their own logins. Having stuff sent to your home, like your credit card statements, is a great idea. And I mentioned division of duties, and one of the things is receive the payment. Well, an easy way to divide up duties is make sure that you're the person who gets the mail. And not only get the mail, and like getting the mail and dumping it on somebody's desk doesn't accomplish a whole lot here. Getting the mail, seeing what checks are in it from insurance companies, and then giving them to somebody, that's a whole lot better. But yeah, anybody who sends you a statement should have it sent either, if it's going by mail, to either your home address or a PO box that you're the only person who has the key to.
Oh, we just may have lost David. At a high level there, some other pieces that I've done personally based on all the work I've done recently with David is even our own little alarm the apps that most alarm companies now have can give you that push alert notification. So it does give that great opportunity to be able to see specifically and getting a push notification on a Saturday morning, right, what that might have come across as. So as we wrap up, I appreciate everyone's time and looking forward to a great event moving forward. On that note, truly appreciate everyone's time. Some other notes about Minnesota and restitution, right? Must be with every entity 10 years or disappears. Ultimately, you're not alone in all this. It is a true privilege to help support doctors each and every day. I would strongly suggest, if you haven't already, connect with David. There's some great information as well. We have a great ebook, happy to send, as well as demographics. If you're thinking about growth, if you're thinking about transitioning, if you're thinking about the long-term goals, that lease has become just a critical component, and all the things we've been sort of screaming from the rooftops for the past 30 years, it's just becoming more and more challenging. So on that note, we truly appreciate everyone's time. I know we're a few minutes over, and thank you very much, everybody. Have a fantastic evening, and hopefully you now feel you've got some good tactical tips and tricks. And if you do feel that gut sensation that, hey, you know what, maybe my broker, maybe my landlord, maybe the landlord's representative is just not right doing what we think they should be, or one of my staff and the warning signs are there, take action. Take action early and often. One thing we've realized is that the earlier you start the renewal process, the better, the higher the value you have, and the more leverage you have in the upcoming lease negotiation. On that note, thank you so much for David for being here. I know he's going through a big storm out on the East Coast, big nor'easter coming through. And thank you, each of you, for your attendance. We'll certainly be in touch and looking forward to working with each of you. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a very successful and profitable year. Have a great day.